This year, my wife and I challenged ourselves to do something that we've never done before and go canoe out into the middle of nowhere and survive for almost a week. I decided while I was out there I wanted to paint as much as I possibly could, and I didn't get to paint as much as I wanted. I ended up having to do a lot more surviving than painting. However, I did get a couple opportunities to actually sit down and paint the beautiful scenery around me, and this is a little video that encompasses my full process of sitting down and painting one little scene out here in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. I brought my painting supplies, of course. I have Holbein gouache in my little artist palette. I have a little cup for water. I have a small pencil. I have a bunch of little brushes in a Ziploc bag. Some of them are portable, so you can take off their cover and to keep them protected. Obviously I didn't do that because this brush is all messed up. What was the point of the cover if I'm gonna not put it in very carefully? I have a little rag, and of course I have a sketchbook. And this sketchbook in particular actually handmade for this trip, so it was the exact size I wanted that could fit with all of my backpacking supplies. And I've got a video about that. So I start by getting a little bit of water in my cup because I don't want to mess with the environment at all. I only put a little bit of water in there so that when I was done with my paint water, I can absorb it all into my rag and not pour it out anywhere, so that any of the chemicals or pigments that are in the paints get anywhere near the water whatsoever. So I started by finding a scene that I really, really liked, and at my campsite I had this funny little stump that I really loved that had a jetty in the background behind the lake. And so what I like to do is kind of frame out what I want and get my pencil out and sketch the approximate placement of my composition, making sure I'm choosing my focal point, which is my little gray stump there, and choosing my proportions and my general layout and composition so that I feel like it looks nice, and so that even as the light changes throughout the day, which it does as I start painting this, I always have the basic shape of everything all set for me. I don't need to question what goes where. And then I started by mixing up and blocking in some colors. So I take a neutral color that I'm seeing out in the actual items that I'm painting. I picked a neutral brownish color for my stump. I picked a neutral bluish color for my water. Neutral greens for my trees that are way in the background. Just colors that I'm going to then be able to work on top of a little bit. Because this is gouache, I don't want to work too much on top of these colors because they can become active again when you get them wet. But I just wanted to get a little bit of color down before I started putting any of the details in. That's how I like to paint. I like to block in lots of color. I'm also focusing on the values here and making sure the parts that I want to be dark are dark and the parts that I want to be light are light, so I can see in my composition if I like the way that the values sit together. So you can see me having more lighter colors and then darkening them up with a darker color to kind of create that contrast. I start drawing in that tree in the background with this flat brush. It sits right behind the little log and kind of creates a little bit of height in the painting, which I really, really liked. And I started with the darkest color, or a fairly dark color, so that I could build up different highlight colors on top of it. Trying to create the illusion of all of those little branches without having to draw every single little pine needle on that tree, because that would take forever and I don't have time. So then I also wanted to start adding some detail to my focal point, which is that stump right there. I started adding in the shadows, and you can see me layering little bits of color on top of each other. I'm being really, really careful here so I'm not rubbing out any of that gouache. But I'm just doing enough so that I'm creating a little something in there, a little more to work with than just a flat matte stump. Then I mix up a really vibrant green, the green that you're actually seeing in that video of that tree in the background. You can see it behind me where I'm painting. A vibrant color to really stand out and create the highlights of that tree and start to give it a little more of a three-dimensional effect and show that there are branches in the front, branches in the back, branches that are more in shade, branches that are definitely well lit. So even though my hand is a little bit in the way here, I'm starting to try and draw more of the details of the background of that jetty that pops out behind the lake that kind of just looks like the other side of the lake in my painting because you can't see much past to the left. But I want to be adding some details here, but not too much. I just want to get the gist and the shape of some of those taller trees back there and get the color of them right. I wanted to find that little horizon line a little bit more and sketch in the little waves that I'm seeing. There was a lot of wind while I was painting in this moment because actually a big storm was rolling in. And so we had a lot of movement on the water, lots of texture in the wave, and lots of sparkles that you're actually seeing in like the corner there. And so I wanted to make sure that I was showing that movement in the water the best I could. And that meant lots of darker streaks and lots of contrast. Here I literally can't see what I'm doing. I was not the best cameraman out in the woods, I gotta say. I was really busy trying to enjoy my painting and also try and get comfortable in the dirt and all that kind of stuff and survive and not get eaten by mosquitoes and a bear, all that kind of stuff. So I gotta apologize a little bit for my camera work, but I did just want to show you how like beautiful it was out there and like how like sitting and actually looking at your subject matter in real life in like a really beautiful environment can be just like a crazy amazing experience. So here you can see me starting to add more of the highlights onto the branches behind the log. Really making that textured and 3D and making sure that it stands out more so than the one behind it. That tree behind it needs to fall the back a little bit, and the tree in the front needs to get a little bit more highlights so we can really see it. It is literally just behind that log. The method I'm using for creating texture there is literally just a very thin little brush that I'm tapping tiny little lines onto. Let's go, Miss Barker in the background. Tapping tiny little lines onto to kind of create the illusion of some of those branches. And then of course, I've got so many sparkles here. As I'm like looking out at this water, I had to get a ton of sparkles on. So I used my tiny brush, got my white, and started to add little bits of sparkles. Usually I save this to the very, very, very end, but I could tell that the weather was gonna start to change, so I was starting to have to rush a little bit on my painting, and I wanted to make sure I got those in there as the weather was changing. I think this painting took me, I wanna say 2 hours, and the light and the weather changed a lot within the span of 2 hours. So I kind of had to make choices for my painting that were maybe different and not exactly what I was looking at in the moment, and kind of using my memory of 40 minutes before to choose some of the lighting choices and mostly lighting choices and color choices, because when I first started painting this, it was like super bright and not super cloudy, and there was lots of wind, and by the time I was getting to the end, it was overcast and a storm was rolling in, and the color had changed from warmer colors to definitely cooler colors. But I wanted to keep some of that warmth in there. You can see me going in with lots of little details now. I've obviously got the bulk of this painting done. There's lots of different colors and texture on my stump, and I'm just going in and seeing areas that I want to add to, seeing areas that I'm just not fully satisfied with, and most of that is underneath the stump. And there goes my camera going to the side. There she goes. I'm clutching my tripod between my legs while I'm painting, so my camera is literally like on my chest as I'm trying to paint. Because where we were camping was on a hill, and I gotta tell you, trying to film in the wilderness is crazy. It's cuckoo bananas, and I did my best. I know it looks terrible, but I did my best. I wanted you to see. So I started adding in little bits of brass, those tiny little details that go right on top. Those are details that you can't add until the very end, because you want to make sure that you have all of the ground level totally covered and all the texture you want on your stump and stuff before you start adding the final things like the grass on top of the whole picture. The stuff that really makes things start to stand out and feel real, the like finishing touches. And that is about as far as I was able to get before this storm started to roll in big time. But I was really happy with where it was going from that point. And I thought that was going to be the end, but as we had to hustle into the tent, and I was staring at the painting, I wanted to keep adding to it a little bit. So when I went in the tent, I started adding a lot more. We've got what looks like a storm rolling in. So we're We're getting some water. We're moving our tent away from this tall tree just in case there's any thunder. So in the tent, I was looking at the painting and there was just more that I wanted to do, even though, because my tent is yellow, my painting was very yellow tinged. So I had to be really careful about my color mixing, not to cool down my painting too much, because when you're in a really warm colored space, you can tend to overcorrect your colors and make them look too cool. So when you actually get out into like normal daylight, your painting looks blue. So I was aware of that, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to turn my painting too blue, but there were details that I was really ready to get going, and we didn't know how long we were going to be in the tent for with this storm rolling in. So I decided to go in and just focus with that tiny little brush on itty bitty baby details, things that I saw that I really wanted to refine. I wanted to get just a little more lifelike realism in it. And I could have stopped there and it would have been still a beautiful painting, but there was all these little details that I wanted to add, like the spots in the sky that were between the pine needles and little more streaks and texture on the stump to make it really come to life. Because what I wanted to do is really immortalize the moment of me being out there in this like exquisitely beautiful place from the memory of my eyes exclusively. Like a camera does not do anything justice out there. It is so beautiful. And so I wanted to see how close I could capture with my eyes the moment I was in out there. And I feel like honestly, this is one of the best plein air paintings I've done. I really took my time. I was really immersed in the environment. I was obviously forced to be out there because we were camping out there for a long time. We canoed all the way out there. We were out in the middle of nowhere. So I had spent a long time really digesting the environment. And then so when I sat down to do this painting in particular, I felt really, really comfortable and confident with my color choices, with what the environment looks like. I could add my own little details, imagination bits while I was still in the tent and I couldn't see the log anymore, to be able to come up with this finalized painting that after I got out of the tent and the storm had finally finished, I could compare to my actual scene. And the light had drastically changed by this point. You can see there's not a sparkle in the water, but I was able to capture that moment. I was super happy with how it turned out. I like to write down the location of wherever I painted that page and the date just for my own memory. It ends up being like a little journal, which makes this little sketchbook a very special piece for me and a vital part of me going to survive in the wilderness. I have another video coming out of the full story of our experience out there, but for right now, I'll see you in the next video.